I want to ask you a question, and I really need you to be ruthlessly honest with yourself as you listen to this. Have you ever felt caught in this agonizing, just excruciating in-between phase in your life?
Oh, yeah. That is a heavy place to be.
Right, like you probably know the exact feeling I'm talking about. You stepped away from a conventional path. Maybe you outgrew a superficial lifestyle, or you just walked away from a traditional career track, something that, looked fantastic on paper.
It garnered approval from everyone you know.
Exactly. Everyone clapped for you, but internally it was just quietly, systematically suffocating your soul. So you made this brave, terrifying choice to step into something deeper, something that actually meant something to you.
But then the reality sets in.
Yeah, here is the brutal catch. You haven't actually found success or peace in that new pursuit yet. You're out of the old world, but you haven't quite arrived in the new one.
You're stranded.
You are. And in that quiet, isolated space in the middle, this very specific, creeping dread starts to set in. Do you ever fear that by leaving the old world behind, without fully securing the new one, you might just dissolve into nothing?
That you've risked your entire foundation.
Yes. Your entire identity, only to end up with absolutely nothing to show for it.
I mean, it is a profoundly unsettling place to exist.
Yeah.
It represents the absolute definition of an existential no man's land. Because human beings, we are biologically and psychologically wired for certainty.
Right. We need to know the plan.
We need to know where we stand, what our foundation consists of, and, what architecture we are actually building toward.
Yeah.
But when you occupy that middle space, that transitional void, all of that structural certainty is just stripped away.
It's like you're in a free fall.
Exactly. You are essentially in a free fall, waiting for a parachute to open while just watching the airplane you just jumped out of disappear over the horizon.
Oh, wow. That is a terrifying visual. But that terrifying free fall, that's actually the entire mission of our deep dive today. We are pulling from this incredible stack of sources revolving around a highly specific yet universally relatable paradox.
And it's found in an ancient text, which is the crazy part.
It is the Bhagavad Gita, specifically chapter 6, verses 38 and 39. But, we aren't just reading ancient history today. That's not what we do here. Our goal is to extract the modern psychological framework that's embedded in these verses.
Yeah, we're examining what modern analysts now call the rent cloud paradox and the sunk cost anxiety of the soul.
Sunk cost anxiety of the soul. I love that phrasing. The goal is to discover exactly how this ancient philosophy tackles the very modern, very visceral fear that your human effort, your literal striving for a better life, might be entirely wasted.
Well, we have this tendency, right, to view existential dread as a totally modern invention, like it's a byproduct of our hyper-connected, high-pressure, late-stage capitalist society.
Right, like we invented anxiety.
Exactly. We think we're the first generation to feel this specific brand of lost. But the source text we're analyzing today, it just shatters that illusion. It demonstrates that the anxiety of the in-between, it's a fundamental, enduring feature of human consciousness.
The fear of abandoning the known for the unknown has literally been haunting us for millennia.
Yes, millennia.
It's just wild to realize that thousands of years ago, someone perfectly diagnosed the 21st century anxiety of the existential middle ground. I was reading through the translation of the verses provided in our sources, and it genuinely felt like reading a psychological profile of anyone who has ever had to change their life.
It really does. So let's paint the picture of what is actually happening in the text here.
Yeah, set the scene for us.
So we have this character, Arjuna, and he is standing on a literal battlefield, but he is having a complete internal collapse. He drops his weapons. He just refuses to participate in the conventional path that's been laid out for him.
She's just done.
Totally done. And he asks his guide, Krishna, this incredibly piercing question about what happens to a person who abandons their worldly duties but fails to reach spiritual perfection. Arjuna is terrified that such a person is just, in his words, deluded on the path to God realization.
Okay, to truly grasp the weight of the anxiety Arjuna is expressing there, we need to analyze the specific Sanskrit term he uses to describe this person.
Yes, the term is uhaya vibrat.
Uhaya vivra.
Exactly. And the literal translation of this is fallen from both.
Fallen from both. Man, that is a devastating concept.
It really is. It encapsulates the modern seeker's dilemma perfectly. It basically describes someone who has outgrown superficial sensory distractions, what the text calls worldly enjoyment.
Right, they can't just care about the rat race anymore.
Right, they can no longer find satisfaction in merely accumulating wealth or status. Yet simultaneously, they are not fully established in peace or self-realization or whatever higher purpose they set out to find.
That phrasing, fallen from both, it's so heavy because it implies a complete lack of traction in any reality. Like, from a psychological standpoint, going backward is impossible. Once you see through the illusion of purely material pursuits, you cannot unsee it.
You really can.
You cannot force yourself to genuinely care about the corporate promotion or the luxury car or the neighborhood gossip in the same way you used to. Your brain has essentially rewired its reward system.
But then going forward feels equally impossible because that deep, unshakable peace just hasn't materialized yet.
Right, and this middle ground, it extracts a massive psychological toll. When you occupy the space of Upayavra, your internal narrative is constantly screaming that you are a failure on two distinct fronts.
You've failed at the conventional game that society rewards.
And you feel like you're failing at the spiritual or purposeful path you chose for yourself.
Because the human mind organizes reality through narrative progress. We need a story that says, I was here, I did this, and now I am there.
We need the A to B to C.
Right. But when you are fallen from both worlds, that narrative framework just disintegrates. You are left floating in this cognitive void, just second-guessing the very intuition that led you to step off the path in the first place.
I want to ground this in a really specific modern reality just because it's so easy to get lost in the philosophical abstraction here. Instead of the cliche, corporate worker who quits to go do yoga in Bali, think about something a bit more intense.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about an elite athlete, say a swimmer who has trained for the Olympics since they were 4 years old. Their entire identity, their family schedule, their societal value, it is all built around being the swimmer.
They are deeply embedded in that material, worldly pursuit. Gold medals, endorsements, all of it.
Exactly. Then, at age 22, they wake up one morning and realize the chlorine, the early mornings, the relentless competition, it's totally hollow. It doesn't mean anything to them anymore. So they do the unthinkable.
I quit.
They quit. They step away to find out who they actually are as a human being, to seek some deeper internal truth.
That is a phenomenal example, by the way, because the societal whiplash in that scenario is just incredibly severe.
It's massive. And for the first few months, maybe it feels liberating. But then a year goes by. They haven't found some magical enlightenment. They haven't figured out a new career. They are just a person sitting in an apartment feeling anxious.
And the panic that sets in right there, that is exactly what Arjuna is describing.
The athlete realizes they have completely forfeited the societal respect, the financial security, and the clear-cut identity of the old world. But they also haven't achieved the profound inner peace or the new purpose of the new world. They are fundamentally Ubhaya Vibra.
And what really exacerbates the agony of that situation is the societal mirror. Modern culture provides highly structured scripts for success. There is a script for the Olympic gold medalist. There's even a script for the romanticized, impoverished artist who eventually makes a masterpiece.
Oh, for sure. We love the starving artist trope.
Right. But there's absolutely no cultural script for the person who voluntarily walks away from a peak conventional position and then merely flounders in obscurity.
None.
When that former athlete goes to a dinner party, society looks at them with a mixture of pity, confusion, and sometimes even anger.
Anger. Why anger?
Because their choice to walk away challenges the validity of everyone else's conventional choices, and you absorb that gaze. The isolation of this middle ground is absolute because you belong to no recognizable tribe.
Wow, that is so true. Which brings us to arguably one of the most haunting metaphors I have ever encountered in a philosophical text. To articulate the sheer terror of this isolation, Arjuna doesn't just say, I feel lost. He uses a highly specific visual in verse 38.
Yes, Chinabram Eva Nijati.
Chinabram Eva Nijati. He asks if this person perishes like a scattered cloud or a rent cloud.
The rent cloud metaphor is just a masterclass in both visual poetry and psychological precision. The analysts in our sources spend a significant amount of time unpacking the meteorological accuracy of this image, actually.
Right, because it's not just a random cloud.
No, Chinabram refers to a specific type of cloud, a storm cloud that has been violently torn away from the main weather system by a crosswind. If you think about the physics of a cloud, it is not actually a solid object. It is a localized, visible manifestation of a larger atmospheric process.
It's a process, not a thing. That is a crucial distinction.
It really is. When a cloud is integrated into a larger weather system, it possesses a function. It's sustained by the updrafts, the temperature differentials, and the moisture of that massive system. It has a role in a dynamic cycle. It gathers moisture, it produces rain, it provides shade.
But the moment it gets severed from that
The
system,
moment it is torn away and isolated in the open sky, it loses its functional context entirely. Because it no longer has the atmospheric support, the pressure and moisture of the main system, it has no rain left to offer. It cannot fulfill its previous
it's
purpose.
just floating there.
And, perhaps most terrifyingly, a cloud has no mechanism to anchor itself. It cannot put down roots in the sky. Cut off from the systemic forces that gave it shape, it cannot sustain its own form. It begins to fray at the edges, dissipating into the surrounding atmosphere until it simply dissolves into nothingness.
I want you to really visualize this as you listen. Picture a vast, endless, piercingly blue sky, and right in the center of it is one single fragmented, wispy little cloud. As you watch it, the wind pulls at it, the edges start to blur, it gets thinner, more translucent until, it is just gone.
Gone.
It leaves no trace. It doesn't fall to the earth. It doesn't leave a mark on the sky. It just ceases to exist. That is Arjuna's fundamental terror. He is articulating the fear that abandoning material ambition without having secured spiritual realization leaves a human being with absolutely nothing. No material legacy, no inner peace, just total dissolution, fading out of existence without a trace.
It is the ultimate fear of insignificance and formlessness. When you are deeply attached to the material world, you are part of a massive weather system. That system might be highly stressful, it might be competitive, it might even be toxic, but it provides you with a definable shape.
It gives you a role.
Exactly. It gives you a recognizable function. You are the provider, the boss, the employee, the consumer. Those roles act as the atmospheric pressure holding your identity together. When you deliberately break away from that pressure to seek a higher, more ethereal truth, you voluntarily surrender the shape society gave you.
You give up the pressure that was holding you together.
Yes. Arjuna's terror is the realization that if you do not rapidly construct a new internal spiritual shape, you will simply evaporate.
Okay, I have to challenge this a bit, or rather, I want to look at the dark side of how we use this fear. Because this metaphor of the dissipating cloud is so deeply unsettling, it explains so much about human cowardice.
How do you mean?
Well, is this paralyzing fear of formlessness the exact reason why millions of people stay in toxic jobs, abusive relationships, or completely hollow lifestyles? Are we so deeply terrified of dissolving into nothing that we actively refuse to leave the main weather system, even if we know for a fact that the system is a destructive hurricane?
I wouldn't call it cowardice. I would call it a highly adapted survival mechanism of the ego. But your premise is entirely correct.
The fear is just that strong.
The fear of formlessness is almost always stronger than the pain of a toxic form. We see this constantly in behavioral psychology. Human beings will tolerate extraordinary levels of misery if that misery is familiar and provides a rigid sense of identity. A toxic job gives you a daily schedule, an income, a title, and an antagonist to complain about. It gives you a dense, heavy shape.
It gives you gravity.
Exactly. Stepping into the unknown requires you to tolerate an extended period of having zero gravity. You have to endure being formless. And as the source text points out through Arjuna's anxiety, the ego interprets formlessness as death.
Wow.
To the ego, being a scattered cloud isn't just uncomfortable. It is an existential threat. So yes, people will cling to the wreckage of a terrible life simply because it is a tangible object to hold on to in the vast sky.
We would rather be a miserable, battered component of a hurricane than risk being a peaceful piece of nothing. That is a really sobering reality about human nature. And it leads us directly into another key Sanskrit concept from verse 38, which attempts to quantify this anxiety. The word is apratiha.
Yes, apratya.
And it literally means without any foundation.
Apratya is the structural counterpart to the visual metaphor of the rent cloud. To be without a foundation is to be entirely untethered from reality. What is so fascinating about the sources we are analyzing today is how they bridge this ancient concept of ungroundedness to a very modern, heavily researched psychological and economic concept.
Right, the sunk cost fallacy.
Specifically, sunk cost anxiety.
Sunk cost anxiety. In normal conversation, we usually hear that applied to financial or time investments. Like, a company pours $10 million into developing a software product. The market changes, and it becomes totally obvious the software will fail.
But instead of scrapping it.
Right. Instead of scrapping it, the CEO pours another $5 million in just to avoid admitting the initial $10 million was wasted. They are trapped by the sunk cost.
Right. The sunk cost fallacy is our cognitive bias to follow through on an endeavor if we have already invested time, effort, or money into it, regardless of whether the current costs outweigh the future benefits. We are biologically wired to be terrified of acknowledging that our investment was squandered.
We hate losing.
We despise it.
Yeah.
But what these verses are doing, and what modern psychology is beginning to understand, is applying this economic concept to our existential reality.
Oh.
We are talking about the sunk cost of the human soul.
Sunk cost applied to the soul.
That's intense. I want to flesh out another analogy here to really drive this home for you. Imagine a brilliant scientist, right, like a top-tier physicist. They spend 20 years of their life researching string theory. They sacrifice their personal life, their health, their youth, all to build this massive intellectual foundation.
They're a cornerstone of that scientific weather system.
Exactly. They are highly respected. Then, at age 45, they stumble upon a mathematical proof that unequivocally demonstrates their specific approach to string theory is a complete dead end. It is structurally flawed.
A completely devastating realization.
Truly. Now, they face the Pratihat dilemma. If they walk away from the theory, they become foundationless. They have to admit that 20 years of relentless, agonizing effort produced nothing of material value. They lose their grants, their prestige, their identity as the leading expert.
And the sunk cost anxiety kicks in. It screams at them to hide the proof and keep publishing flawed papers just to maintain their foundation. Because if they step away and they don't immediately discover a new breakthrough in quantum mechanics, they are the scattered cloud. They are a 45-year-old starting from absolute zero.
And that fear of starting from zero is compounded by how society measures a human life. We measure success almost exclusively by what we have physically or socially constructed.
Everything is a building metaphor.
Exactly. Our entire linguistic framework is based on construction metaphors. You build a career, you build a family, you build a wealth portfolio, you build a reputation. Possessing a solid foundation is the unspoken prerequisite for being considered a valid adult.
Therefore, making the conscious, deliberate choice to become a pratihata, willingly dismantle your own foundation in pursuit of truth, is arguably our ultimate societal taboo. If you don't have a foundation, society doesn't know how to categorize you. You are categorized as a drifter, a flake, or a failure.
This profound fear of losing one's foundation, the sheer terror of realizing that the sunk costs of your entire life's effort might genuinely be lost, is the exact psychological trigger that pushes Arjuna to his breaking point.
He just can't take it anymore.
The anxiety of being a pratha becomes intolerable. He can no longer stomach the ambiguity. He needs a definitive mechanism of reality. And this transitions us beautifully into verse 39, where the tone of the text shifts dramatically. It moves from anxious, metaphor-laden questioning to a rigid, absolute demand for truth.
It really is a massive shift in tone. Let's look at the wording in verse 39. Arjuna says, "O Krishna, you alone are capable of completely dispelling this doubt of mine." The focal point here is the Sanskrit phrase chetam arhasi ashita, which means to completely dispel doubt.
It's a very powerful phrase.
I am just struck by the intense intellectual rigor in Arjuna's demand. He isn't whining. He isn't looking for a metaphorical pat on the back.
If we break down the linguistic roots, ashita implies leaving absolutely no remainder. He is demanding root-level clarity, an excavation of the doubt so complete that not a single trace is left behind.
No crumbs.
Exactly. Arjuna is standing on the precipice of an existential abyss, staring down the very real possibility that human effort can be entirely, irrevocably wasted, that we can become literally nothing. In the face of that gaping void, philosophical platitudes are insulting.
They are completely useless. Think about your own life and how rare this level of intellectual honesty actually is. When you are deeply anxious about your life choices, when you are lying awake at 3 a.m., terrified that you've ruined your trajectory, that quitting your job was a mistake, that ending your marriage was a mistake, what is your instinctual reaction?
You seek comfort.
Right. You call your best friend or your mother or a mentor, and you essentially beg them for comfort. You want them to say, "Don't worry, you're doing great. Everything happens for a reason. The universe has a plan." We desperately seek out reassurance to soothe the symptom of the anxiety.
We seek comfort because comfort allows the ego to maintain its current illusion. But seeking comfort is fundamentally different from seeking truth. Arjuna recognizes a vital psychological mechanism here. If Krishna merely offers a comforting platitude, if he says, there, Arjuna, you are a good person, it will all work out in the end. The core doubt will remain entirely intact.
The fear of being the scattered cloud doesn't go away just because someone hands you a warm blanket. It just goes dormant. It waits for the next moment of crisis to tear you apart again.
Precisely. By demanding Chetamarhasya Shitak, Arjuna is demanding a surgical intervention. He is asking for an understanding of the mechanics of reality so profound, so structurally sound, that the doubt itself loses its environment and dies. He is demanding to know the physics of human consciousness. Is human striving inherently, objectively faith, or can it truly be squandered?
There is something so incredibly empowering about that vulnerability. It feels contradictory to say vulnerability is empowering, but in this case, it is the ultimate power move. Arjuna is essentially looking at his guide and saying, I am terrified, I have destroyed my life, I have zero foundation, and I need you to explain the fundamental mechanics of the universe to prove to me that I haven't just erased my own existence.
It's a bold demand.
It is, and I think that validates a profound right for anyone listening to this. You do not have to settle for toxic positivity. You are allowed to demand deep, structural answers to your life doubts. You are allowed to ask, show me the math. What is the actual mechanism that ensures my moral and spiritual efforts aren't a massive waste of time?
And that demand for the mechanism leads us to a critical, humbling realization about the tools we are currently using to seek those answers. In the second half of verse 39, Arjuna explains the specific reason he is demanding this from Krishna rather than trying to figure it out himself or asking a fellow warrior.
What does he say?
He states, "For there is no one else to be found who can destroy this existential doubt." The phrase used is tvadanya, nahi upapadyate.
Meaning, literally, no one else is capable of doing this, which begs the question, why? Why can't Arjuna logic his way out of this? Why can't he just sit down, think really hard, and resolve the paradox of the rent cloud?
Because he is explicitly acknowledging the hard boundary of everyday human reasoning. The sources we are utilizing point out a massive philosophical limitation here. Secular logic, ordinary human intellect, the scientific method, and even advanced clinical psychology all have a definitive hard limit.
A hard limit.
Yes, they are phenomenally powerful tools for analyzing the observable material world. They can explain cognitive biases, they can map trauma responses, they can optimize your daily habits.
Yet they cannot answer the core existential question.
They cannot. Secular logic is fundamentally bound by material data. You can perfectly explain the thermodynamics of how a physical cloud forms and dissipates. It can explain the neurological firing patterns in your brain when you experience sunk cost anxiety. But it possesses zero capacity to determine if the inner unseen spiritual effort you made, while feeling that anxiety has any persistent, lasting value once your material body and social identity are gone.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic here because this is where modern listeners, myself included, start to feel defensive.
I get that. Let's hear it.
We are obsessed with frameworks. If I am in an existential crisis, my immediate response is to open a spreadsheet. I make a pros and cons list, I track my daily habits, I listen to a behavioral psychology podcast to understand my dopamine receptors. I use data to try and map out my life and mathematically prove to myself that I'm on the right track. Are you, and by extension this ancient text, telling me that all my spreadsheets and data optimization can't actually solve my existential dread?
I am saying that your spreadsheets are exactly what is keeping you trapped in the rent cloud.
Ouch. Okay, explain that. How is my spreadsheet keeping me trapped?
Because you are attempting to apply economic material math to a spiritual non-material crisis. Your spreadsheets and habit trackers are magnificent tools for navigating the main weather system. They will help you optimize your career, manage your finances, and maintain your physical health.
Right.
But they are entirely useless for addressing what happens when you step out of that system. The human intellect possesses a compulsive need to measure, to quantify, and to project future outcomes based on historical data.
Right. If I input X effort, I expect Y outcome.
Exactly. But existential mortality, the ultimate fate of our consciousness and our unseen efforts, operates on a dimensional plane where that specific type of material data does not exist. It's an epistemological mismatch. You're trying to measure the temperature of a room using a tape measure.
A tape measure.
Yeah, the tool is simply incapable of registering the phenomena you are anxious about.
Measuring temperature with a tape measure. That is a brilliant way to frame it. It is a deeply humbling realization. We idolize the intellect today. We truly believe that if we just gather enough data points, if we read enough self-help articles, if we optimize our morning routines to absolute perfection, we can logic our way out of the fear of death and failure.
But you can't.
No, the sources are pointing out that intellect alone cannot guarantee the safety of our efforts. The intellect can only measure the material foundation, the apatita. To address the fear of the scattered cloud, you have to deliberately turn away from secular logic. You have to seek out an awakened master, a divine intelligence, or a cosmic perspective that operates outside the weather system.
Which brings us to a profound psychological interpretation of Arjuna's plea. The analysts we're looking at in the sources today, they actually point out that this specific moment in the text, the dropping of weapons, the demand for truth, the acknowledgement of logic's limit, it's not merely a question. It is the ultimate act of surrender to truth.
The word surrender is so heavily loaded, it has a lot of negative baggage in modern culture. When we think of surrender, we envision a general waving a white flag on a battlefield.
We associate it with defeat.
With weakness, with giving up because you simply aren't strong enough or smart enough to keep fighting.
That is the ego's definition of surrender. The ego views surrender as a failure of its own power. But true intellectual surrender, in the philosophical context of this text, is completely different. It is not a collapse. It is an orientation.
An orientation.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is the conscious, highly courageous recognition of the boundaries of egoic logic. It is possessing the profound wisdom to know exactly when your tools have failed and when you must pivot to seek wisdom from a higher source.
Let's expand on that idea of it being an orientation rather than a collapse. So instead of banging your head against a wall trying to use a spreadsheet to solve a crisis of the soul, you stop. You don't stop because you're stupid. You stop because you are smart enough to realize the tool is wrong for the job.
Exactly. Think back to the metaphor of the ungrounded rent cloud. What is the cloud doing? It is being tossed around frantically by the wind, dissipating, lost, entirely subject to forces it doesn't understand. Arjuna, in this moment of intellectual surrender, is doing the exact opposite of the scattered cloud.
How so?
By admitting the absolute limitations of his own mind, and by turning with total unvarnished sincerity to a cosmic perspective, he is actually anchoring himself. He is ceasing the frantic, pointless movement. He is finding his true foundation, his pratya, not in his own material success or intellectual superiority, but in his alignment with ultimate truth.
That is a massive paradigm shift. It redefines what it means to be strong. True surrender is an act of supreme intellectual honesty. It's looking at the universe and admitting, I do not have the data to prove my efforts matter. My logic cannot penetrate the veil of mortality. I cannot prove that my life isn't a sunk cost. Therefore, I must tap into a higher awareness that possesses the full picture.
Yes, beautifully said.
It's almost like you are an engineer operating a massive piece of machinery, and your internal battery is dying. Surrender isn't abandoning the machine, it's recognizing you need to plug into the main power grid because your personal battery doesn't have the voltage required to run the diagnostics.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. And the immense beauty of this intellectual surrender is that it acts as the necessary catalyst for the ultimate resolution. Because Arjuna possesses the courage to fully articulate his terror of the middle ground, because he admits his dread of the sunk cost of his efforts, and because he acknowledges his inability to logic his way out of it, he creates the necessary internal space to receive the answer he so desperately needs.
A cup must be empty to be filled.
Precisely. The ego's logic must be set aside for cosmic truth to enter.
Which brings us to the ultimate payoff of this entire deep dive. While our focus has primarily been on diagnosing the problem in verses 38 and 39, the source material we are working with explicitly teases Krishna's legendary reply that arrives in the immediately following verses.
The definitive answer.
Yes, it is the definitive answer to the rent cloud paradox. It is the cure for the sunk cost anxiety of the soul. Krishna's response to the fear that human effort can be wasted is unequivocally, no good effort is ever lost.
It is one of the most profound cosmic reassurances in all of philosophical literature. The perspective provided here fundamentally alters how we view human striving, failure, and the passage of time. The core principle Krishna outlines is that every single step forward in self-awareness, every genuine attempt at goodness, permanently elevates the individual's consciousness.
The implications of that are staggering. It completely destroys the concept of sunk cost anxiety.
It annihilates it. Let's return to the concept of building a foundation. In the material world, the physical world governed by secular logic, if you attempt to build a bridge across a river and you run out of money halfway across, that effort is considered entirely wasted.
Right, a half bridge is useless.
It doesn't get you to the other side. The sunk cost is real and the investment is lost. But in the realm of consciousness, the physics are entirely different.
How so?
Because in the realm of consciousness, if you build half a bridge, you are permanently, irrevocably transformed into a person who knows how to build half a bridge. The knowledge, the resilience, the spiritual muscle you develop during the effort is integrated into your being.
It becomes part of you.
Yes. Even if a person stumbles, even if they fall back into toxic old habits, or crucially, even if they physically die before reaching their ultimate goal of enlightenment or perfect peace, the sheer effort itself alters their consciousness permanently.
I want to connect this directly back to the rent cloud metaphor, because this is where the fear is finally conquered. Arjuna was paralyzed by the terror of being the cloud that detaches from the system, loses its ability to reign, and just dissolves into absolute nothingness.
The fear of being erased.
Right. But Krishna is revealing a mechanism of reality that proves Arjuna's physics are wrong. Because every moral and spiritual effort permanently elevates consciousness, it is actually mechanically impossible to truly become a dissipated cloud. You might lose your material shape, your job title might vanish, your social standing might collapse, your ego's preferred identity might burn to the ground. But the energetic essence of your effort remains intact. The foundation, the pratiha, isn't material success at all.
The foundation is the effort itself.
The effort is the foundation. That is breathtaking.
If we connect this to the macro perspective of human development, it means the very act of striving for truth, even if you feel you are failing miserably every single day, is actively constructing a foundation that cannot be destroyed by time or circumstance.
Wow.
The paralyzing anxiety of the existential middle ground, that terrible upayavivra state, stems entirely from the false materialist belief that only the final visible result matters. Once you realize that the effort is the evolution, that the striving is the success, the middle ground transforms. It ceases to be a place of terror and dissolution and becomes a crucible of profound, indestructible growth.
I just marvel at the immense visceral relief this offers. Think about the Olympic athlete who quit. Think about the physicist who lost their theory. Or, more importantly, think about you listening to this right now. If you are sitting in that excruciating middle ground today, feeling like an absolute failure in both the material world you bravely left behind and the spiritual or purposeful world you haven't yet mastered, well, your sheer, messy, agonizing effort to grow is the anchor.
You're not losing ground.
No, you are not dissolving into the sky. You are evolving. The struggle itself, the very pain you feel from being in the in-between, is the definitive proof that you are not a scattered cloud.
It is the ultimate validation of the human spirit. It validates every single clumsy attempt we make to be better, more conscious humans. The false starts, the embarrassing moments we stumble, the periods of feeling totally hopelessly lost, none of it is wasted.
Not a single bit.
Not a single ounce of that emotional and spiritual friction is a sunk cost. It is all accumulating. It is all being metabolized into the permanent elevation of your consciousness.
We have covered some incredibly deep, foundational ground today. We started by plunging into the very real, very painful dilemma of the existential middle ground, unpacking the psychological weight of feeling fallen from both worlds. We visualized the terrifying metaphor of the scattered rent cloud and examined how perfectly it encapsulates our modern sunk cost anxiety, that pervasive societal fear that walking away from a conventional visible foundation guarantees our efforts will be wasted.
We then explored the absolute necessity of demanding root-level clarity, examining why seeking comforting platitudes is totally insufficient for existential dread. This led us to the humbling realization that our everyday logic, our spreadsheets, and our secular intellect have hard boundaries when it comes to answering the ultimate questions of existence and human value.
Which required us to redefine the concept of true intellectual surrender. Not as a weak collapse, but as a courageous admission of those boundaries in order to plug into a higher truth. And finally, we arrived at the ultimate paradigm-shifting reassurance provided by the text that in the physics of consciousness, no good effort is ever lost. Every step, even a step that looks like a stumble to the outside world, permanently changes you for the better.
It's a beautiful, essential truth.
It really is. So, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over as you step back into your life today. Based on the profound mechanical wisdom laid out in these ancient verses, if it is fundamentally, structurally true that no good effort is ever lost, and that every single sincere step forward permanently elevates your consciousness, well, how does that change the way you view your most recent failure or false start in life? Could it be that your scattered cloud isn't dissolving into nothingness at all, but rather quietly gathering the moisture required for an entirely new, life-giving storm? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the things that terrify you. Keep demanding root-level mechanics. Keep striving for what genuinely matters. And above all, trust that your sincere efforts are never, ever wasted. Catch you on the next one.